Have you been fascinated by stories such as Robinson Crusoe and In 80 Days Around the World? Well, I got you covered. Here are 4 inspiring adventuresses that explore the world by car, ship, foot, and on a camel. And I promise they are everything else but fiction. Hi, my name is Mana and welcome to the first episode of HERstory, a series to make female contributions in the world more visible. A female race driver to be the first to circumnavigate the world by car sounds unreal? Well, meet Clärenore Stinnes. When Clärenore was little, she knew all motor types by heart, and she had a big dream. She wanted to become a professional racing driver. She accomplished her dream in her early 20s already and wins one race after another against her rivals. And if that hadn't been challenge enough, she sets a goal for herself, a bigger goal this time, to be the first person to circumnavigate the globe by car. Of course, people had told her she was unable to do so. Her family of wealthy entrepreneurs had ultimately cut her off any support since she seemed unreasonable. And Clärenore's cross-dressing in trousers and ties, as you can see here, as well as her hunger to interfere in the male-dominated sphere of motorsport, was considered nonsense and frankly a disgrace. Well, certainly Clärenore's ambition and competitiveness raised some eyebrows. Luckily, due to Clärenore's stunning racing career, a German company called Adler sponsors her car. In 1922, against all odds, Clärenore Stinnes starts from Frankfurt on her world trip. Her way leads her over the frozen lake Baikal to the Gobi Desert. She dynamites, and yes, you heard correctly, she dynamites her way through the Alps, drives to North America's changing landscapes, fights wolves and robbers with 3 revolvers that she hid in her luggage, and finally, 2 years later, she successfully completed the circumnavigation and is welcomed in her hometown Frankfurt with well-deserved applause. Indeed, she was quite an extraordinary woman. From 3 assistants that accompanied her in the beginning of her journey, 2 technicians and the Swedish photographer Carl Axel Söderström, only 1 remained. The technicians gave up rather sooner than later due to the harsh conditions and returned home early. Only Söderström, who was hired to document the circumnavigation, stuck with her till the end and delivered the stunning stories and photographs that now show us insight into an adventurous life. In fact, interestingly, Söderström was picked by Clärenore because A, he was married, and B, she assumed a cooler temper due to his Nordic roots. Stereotypical? Yes, very much so. But, I mean, at least she was traveling with 3 men who she didn't know before. So she tried to prevent as much as possible, or try to minimize as much as possible, the risk of sexual assault, which we have to think about as a woman, and also any upcoming of romantic feelings. Sounds clever, right? But it didn't work out, because in the end of it all, adventure and experiences connect, and Clärenore and Söderström will marry soon after they return, and then lead a rather unadventurous life in the countryside. Well, it's granted to them. From a car to a boat, let's travel back to the 18th century to meet Jeanne Baret. Baret, disguised as a male assistant with the name Jean, embarked on a round-the-world expedition led by Admiral Louis-Antoine de Bourville in 766. Her story and how she got there is, well, let me say, quite unusual. In the 760s, she was employed as a housekeeper to renowned naturalist Philibert Commerson. The latter was married, but his wife died in childbirth, and soon after that, the nature of the relationship of Commerson and Baret became apparent as she was getting pregnant. Since a child born out of wedlock would suffer severely, and furthermore, the association between that child and Commerson would have destroyed his reputation beyond repair, Jeanne would give the child up for adoption soon after the birth. From 766 to 69, Jeanne Baret traveled on a ship with 300 men across the seas. Since Commerçant was in bad health, Baret collected plants, stones and shells, organized and catalogued their specimens and notes, and it became more apparent that she was not only his romantic but also his intellectual partner. Indeed, Admiral Bougainville will later refer to her as an expert naturalist herself. Even though rumors about her sex circulated apparently on the ship, her gender was not discovered until April 768, when the expedition reached Tahiti. Ahutoro, an adopted son of the chief of the village where Louis-Antoine de Bougainville anchored, was the one pointing out that she was not a man. And in fact, until today, it is not clear if he saw in her a woman or a mahu, which is a third gender in Tahitian culture with, well, let me say, special spiritual and social roles. On the ship, Admiral Bougainville then began to, well, obviously question Jeanne and Ahutoro. While making a stop in Mauritius to stock up supplies, Commerçant found his old friend and fellow botanist Pierre Poivre, who was then the governor of the island, and decided to stay with him, together with Baret. Well, this decision was not completely voluntarily taken, I suppose, because since Admiral Bougainville needed to solve the not-so-minor problem that there was a woman illegally on board of his ship in times where women were strictly forbidden from joining the navy, that was a solution. When Commerçant died due to his health issues in February 1773, Baret ran a tavern and possibly some other businesses on the island. Back in France, Baret will receive a letter by the Ministry of Marine in April 1785. The document grants her an honorary pension and shows the high regard with which she was held. Apparently, Admiral Bougainville himself spoke very highly of her, and the letter also does not only emphasize her courage and that she did everything demanded, it confirms too that Jeanne Baret was the first woman circumnavigating the globe by ship. Now, more and more gets uncovered about this fascinating personality, and I definitely recommend that you read the in 2020 published new biography of her, which is called In Search of the Women Who Saved the World. It is very interesting. I will put the link down in the description, so definitely check that out if you're interested. Since we talked about seafarers, let's skip forward roughly 100 years to meet the girl who tamed the Arctic. Louise Arner Boyd, also called Arctic Diana, came from a privileged family from California, inherited a big amount of money, and started to travel the world. One specific place sparked her further career: Norway. From Tromsø, she organized her polar expeditions. 1928, she went on the search of Roald Amundsen, a legendary polar researcher and, by the way, the first man who reached the South Pole, who himself was back then on a rescue mission of Italian colleague Umberto Nobile, who aimed to fly over the Arctic by plane. Arctic Diana covered over 16,000 kilometers, but even after a month, there was no trace of the missing explorers to be found. Then she and her crew headed towards Greenland, and there they discovered new weather phenomena, new species, and islands. And Louise photographed, surveyed, and collected hundreds of botanical specimens. The American Geographical Society published her findings and photographs in a book called The Fjord Region of East Greenland. And in fact, a remote area of eastern Greenland was later named after her, the Louise Boyd Land. Interesting, right? So if you ever visit Greenland, let me know, guys. Many, however, found her attitude of calling herself an explorer specifically as a female presumptuous. However, Louise Boyd accumulated many academic honors during her lifetime, received the Column Medal of the American Geographical Society in 1960, and was even the first person to be selected to their board. Arctic Diana never stopped being fascinated by the endless ice, and even by age 68, she flew as the first woman ever over the North Pole. Living such an extraordinary life, of course, is costly, and it costed her in the end all her fortune. Thus, Arctic Diana unfortunately suffered from severe financial difficulties in her later years until she died in 1972. However, her legacy, of course, remains. The next person we are going to look at is the Swiss travel writer Isabelle Eberhardt. Isabelle grows up in the Villeneuve, which was a meeting place for plenty of members of the Tsar opposition. Fairly educated in a house in which French, German and Russian was spoken, she might have breathed in a revolutionary mindset from very, very early on. In her teens, she begins to cut her hair as short as a boy's and wears her brother's trousers. And when she begins to smoke, people said that they could barely tell her from her male siblings apart. In Geneva, she falls in love with a young Muslim and consequently starts exchanging letters with intellectuals about the Islamic religion and Arabic culture. In fact, she becomes so fascinated by it that she travels together with her mother to Algiers. And there she converted to Islam. After her mom's death, Isabelle dresses once again in men's clothes and invents the alter ego Sidi Mahmoud, an Arabic scholar. She learns, long before Lawrence of Arabia explored the desert, the languages and culture of Northwest Arabia. She traveled alone through the Sahara and the Atlas Mountains, lived with the Bedouins, and well, she was also seen quite frequently in the brothels and bars of Maghreb. Indeed, Isabelle led a promiscuous liberal sex life herself, too. Even after she meets her future husband, Slimane Echni, Isabelle still does not quite feel like she belongs anywhere but to herself. And even after the wedding, Isabelle will seek regular solitude in the desert. As she later functioned, though, as a war journalist at the Moroccan border and also as a translator between the French military and native ethnic tribes, Isabelle became there one of the early criticizers of colonial regimes as well as missionaries, and spoke out against how the French colonialist empire treated people in Algiers. With deteriorating health conditions due to malaria and possibly syphilis, Isabelle attempts suicide in the desert but fails. With 27 years only, Isabelle will give herself up. She refuses to leave her home even with the news of an incoming flash flood that will literally destroy everything in its way. And that's why she ultimately dies in it. Her undoubtedly restless heart is expressed one last time in this quote. Mais aussi, comme toujours, je ressens une tristesse infinie qui envahit mon âme. Un désir inexprimable dans quelque chose que je ne saurais dire. Une nostalgie d'un ailleurs que je ne saurais nommer. Which translates to, as always, I feel endless sadness crawling up my soul, and an indescribable longing for something that I cannot put into words, a yearning for a place that I cannot name. Finding your own path is a revolutionary act. Thus, all of the presented women in one way or another are protesters. Protesters to gender norms, protesters to colonialism, protesters to the ignorance of female accomplishments and capability in supposedly male-dominated spheres, such as scientific explorations or motorsport. And history continues. Nowadays, women are still consistently proving adrenaline and adventure are not solely male-exclusive terms. Here are some honorary mentions of contemporary challenge-tackling adventuresses. Here we go. Number 1, Challenge Sophie. Sophie is a British adventurer who in 2014 became the first and only person to cycle the Alps and climb the highest mountain in each of the 8 Alpine countries. Lizzie Outside, number 2, became the first solo female in history to paddle board across the English Channel to raise awareness for the alarming amount of rubbish in our seas, in which she created the Plastic Patrol movement. Interesting, check that out. And 3, Polish sailor Krystyna Chojnowska-Liskiewicz, first female adventurer to sail solo around the world in the 1970s. 4, Edson Taylor. On October 24th, 1901, Taylor climbed into a barrel and dropped into the Niagara River. It made her the first person ever to survive a barrel fall over Niagara Falls. And last number 5, Cassie de Pecol. Before she turned 28, de Pecol had visited 196 nations in less than 18 months. I put all names of the introduced explorers in the video description below in case you want to conduct further research. Next week, by the way, guys, we are going to meet some pirates, so stay tuned and make sure to subscribe if you do not want to miss another HERstory episode. Until then, besitos, have a lovely day, ladies, gentlemen, and rainbow friends, and see you next time. Until then, bye-bye.